I spent years helping her build a future. Not just the business, a life, a home. Something that felt like us. And when it finally stood on its own, when the last screw was tightened, the last pitch deck exported, she looked at it, smiled like she was proud, and walked away. There's a box in my garage that says Maddie's Contracts. 2015. It's still sealed. Still got her handwriting on the top flap in black Sharpie. I don't know why I haven't thrown it out, or opened it. Some things just stay where they are, even after everything else has moved on. I met Maddie at a tech mixer in East Austin, summer of 2015. Hot loud, everybody trying to be somebody. I was showing off my biosensor prototype. Sweaty palms, bad lighting, one working port. She walked up, took one look at the board, and said, "You built this?" I said, "Yeah," trying to sound confident. She handed me a napkin and said, "You also burned through your ground line." Then she smiled. That's how it started. By fall, she was helping me with pitch slides. By winter, she was crashing on my couch. By spring, she was in every part of my life without asking. And I didn't mind. Actually, I thought that's what love was supposed to feel like. My dad Thomas used to say, you don't fall in love. You co-engineer it. Like anything worth keeping. He built cabinets and clocks. Didn't talk much. But when he saw something broken, he fixed it. Quietly. One weekend, Maddie and I brought our prototype home to show him. He looked at the rough sensor housing, ran his thumb along the edge, then handed me his old green thermos. It smelled like him. Metal and too strong coffee. Then he said, "Looks good. Just remember, one of you is gonna outgrow the other. Don't fake it when it happens." I didn't know what he meant. Not really. I thought we were growing in the same direction. Maddie wanted more than just tech. She wanted investors' branding scale. I just wanted to get it to work right. We started spending late nights in her garage. LEDs flickering. Cheap tacos, whiteboard scribbles, coffee ground by hand. I engraved a little C.M. on the board frame. Gave it to her like a promise. She smiled, kissed me, but didn't say anything. Just took a photo and said, "This'll look great in the pitch deck." She started getting attention at events. People liked her voice, her confidence. She was easy to follow. At one investor meeting, the guy leaned across the table and said, "You're too sharp for this scrappy life." Maddie laughed. Later she told me, "I think I could get us in a room with Langford." Langford. I didn't know who he was yet. One night I heard her on the phone. I wasn't eavesdropping. I just happened to walk by the hallway. She said, "No, I haven't told him yet. It's not the right time." I paused. My hand on the bedroom door. But I didn't open it. Didn't ask. Just turned around, went back to my workbench, and sanded the edges of our next prototype. That's what I did back then. Fix things, quietly. After that, she got harder to reach. Not physically, just emotionally. She started answering in half-thoughts. Her hugs got shorter. Our meals turned into check-ins. But I didn't confront her. Didn't press. Because part of me, the part that still believed in us, thought maybe it was just a phase. A dip. A burnout. Something we'd climb out of. The night before our final pitch, she was working late in the kitchen. I brought her tea. She barely looked up. There was a text on her phone screen. It lit up when I placed the cup down. She tilted the phone away. I pretended I didn't see. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd just asked her, "Who haven't you told what, Maddie? What aren't you saying? Is it him?" But I didn't. And maybe that silence was the start of the end. Because sometimes you don't lose someone in one big crash, you lose them in the slow turn when they start facing a different direction a little more each day. Until one morning you wake up alone and realize they've been gone for months. Would you have asked who she meant? Or would you just stay quiet and wait to lose everything slower? You don't notice betrayal when it starts. It doesn't shout. Doesn't throw a plate or slam a door. It enters like a whisper through the smallest unlocked window. A change in tone. A missed call. A sentence that used to end in "we" now stops at "I." By 2019, we were already successful, at least on paper. The biosensor had landed a small military research contract. I was pitching at a NASA-affiliated grant program that fall. We had a whiteboard full of milestones, a bank account that didn't look like a punchline anymore. But something had shifted. Not suddenly like a leak under the floorboards. You don't hear it right away. But when you do, the damage is already done. Maddie wasn't around much. She said it was networking season. Demo days, mixers, angel rounds. Sometimes she stayed out overnight. No drama, no excuses. Just a quick text crashing at Olivia's. Long drive home, no kiss emoji. Just a period. At first, I didn't question it. Startups are messy. Sleep is rare. Plans change. But then she started skipping meetings. The ones we used to rehearse for weeks. I'd show up on Zoom with our deck, watch the green dot next to her name flicker, then disappear. One morning, I found our old USB on the kitchen counter. It still had the label she printed Gen 1 Proto, Feb 2016. It sat there for weeks, right next to the coffee grinder. She didn't touch either. The week of the NASA pitch, I came home to an empty kitchen. The lights were off. The air smelled like lavender soap and stale toast. On the counter next to a pile of unopened mail was a printed RSVP card, heavy cardstock. Embossed gold lettering. Langford Foundation Annual Gala. Host Noah Langford. Black tie. +1 optional. I'd never heard of the event. Or the foundation. But Noah's name stuck. Maddie had mentioned him once, casually. An old contact. Nothing big. Except now it was printed on 300 GSM paper and lying in our kitchen like it lived there. She came home around midnight, hair curled, smelled like grapefruit and gin. She slipped off her heels, didn't even flinch when she saw me standing in the hallway. Hey, she said, like we were roommates. Like I hadn't been sitting in that silence for hours. I asked her how the investor meeting went. She said, fine. Just ideas right now. Then she changed the subject. Asked if we had oat milk left. I didn't press. But the RSVP was still in my hand, and she didn't ask about it. The next day, I pitched solo. NASA's review panel. Virtual room of government engineers and research fellows. She was supposed to open the deck. Introduce the vision. Instead, I did the whole thing myself. I told them about remote diagnostics. About wearable tech that could monitor respiration at high altitudes. About the dream Maddie and I had started 6 years earlier. I didn't mention her name. They said they'd get back to me. That weekend, I brought home takeout from her favorite Thai place. Same order as always, pad ki mao, extra basil, no bell peppers. She was on the balcony typing something on her laptop. Legs crossed, phone face down next to her wine glass. I handed her the food. She barely looked up. You don't have to keep doing that, she said. Just like that. No smile, no thanks. Like I was a ghost with good timing. I told her about the NASA pitch. Said it went okay. She nodded once, then asked if I could pick up dry cleaning next week. That was Maddie now. Efficient, disconnected, always on her way somewhere. A few days later, I opened our shared desktop folder just to check the grant follow-up letter. But something else caught my eye, a newly scanned contract labeled Langford. Phase I clicked. It was full of legalese, but one line stood out: primary liaison Madeline Kersey. Independent consultant. No mention of me. Or the biosensor. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I closed the folder and walked out to the garage. The USB was still there, untouched. Like it didn't matter anymore. Later that night, I tried to bring it up. We were brushing our teeth. The kind of quiet, dull moment that used to feel safe. I asked her, are we still building this together, you and me? She didn't answer right away. She spit, rinsed, wiped her mouth. Then said, you're brilliant, Callum. But you play in small rooms. Noah builds stadiums. Then she turned off the light and walked past me to bed. The next morning she didn't make coffee. Didn't grind the beans. Didn't even glance at the corner where the grinder sat, the one my dad had used every morning of my childhood. Instead, she was already dressed. Black pants. Gray coat. The kind of outfit people wear when they don't plan to come home after. She walked past me in the kitchen, tossed a folded paper onto the table. Plane ticket. Single destination, Denver. I'll just be a few days, she said, not looking up, zipping her bag. I didn't ask why Denver. Didn't ask who was picking her up, because by then, I knew. She packed light. One overnight bag. A single jacket, the earrings she only wore when she was being photographed. I stood in the doorway as she checked the locks. As if she needed closure from the apartment more than from me. I asked, "Do you want me to wait up?" She looked at me then. For the first time in what felt like weeks. And she said, not cruel, not sad, just soft, "Callum, I'm not leaving you. I'm choosing me. No fight, no accusation, no apology. Just that." She stepped out the door, and I stood in the kitchen next to a silent grinder next to a USB no one wanted anymore, watching the sunlight fall where she used to sit. The apartment wasn't quiet, it just didn't have anyone left in it. I didn't call her that night. Didn't check her location, didn't scroll her tagged photos, didn't text "Are you safe?" even though I wanted to. I just sat there. The apartment felt too clean. Too cleared of her. Her toothbrush gone. Her hoodie off the chair. The USB still on the counter like a joke. The coffee grinder stared back at me from its spot by the window. I didn't touch it. Not that day, not the next. It stayed quiet like a voice I used to trust but no longer knew how to use. I opened the junk drawer, not even sure why. Just looking for something to hold on to, I guess. A note, a receipt, a reason. Instead, I found the thermos. My dad's old one. Still dented near the cap, still carried the scent of burnt beans and wisdom I hadn't listened to. And suddenly I heard his voice again. Not in memory. Not in nostalgia. But clear, sharp, unforgiving. "Don't wait to be told you're done." It hit me harder now. Years too late. Because maybe I'd already been done for months. I just hadn't accepted the silence for what it was. She didn't scream. She just slowly, calmly made room for a life I wasn't in. And I held the door open without realizing it. If someone says you're too good for this world, are they freeing you? Or are they just firing you quietly? Tell me. Because I still don't know which one she meant. And I'm starting to think. Maybe that's the point. I didn't ghost the world. I just stopped answering questions no one asked me directly. People assumed I moved. Some said I was consulting for defense contracts, others thought I joined a retreat. The truth was quieter than all that. I took a fellowship in the desert, Los Alamos. Dry, bright, structured, far from everything that used to echo. No one here asked about us. No one said her name. I liked it that way. My mornings were the same. 5:30 run along the fencing trail. Cold shower. Protein bar. Boot up simulation. Silence until lunch. Evenings I logged my notes. Handwritten. Ink on paper. Same black notebook every week. Same line to close every entry. Still here. Still building. I never said what. Didn't need to. One night a hummingbird landed on the window frame outside my bunk. It hovered there a moment, just long enough for its shadow to flicker across my journal page. I don't know why, but I left the screen door open that night. The desert wind came in. It didn't move anything. Didn't ask permission. It just reminded me that stillness isn't silence, it's a choice, and I was still choosing it. Dr. Elise Marin arrived in October. New liaison from the remote biolab upstate, mid-30s, soft voice, no perfume. She introduced herself with a small wave and said I'll be around if anything needs translation. I nodded once. For the next few weeks, we didn't speak much. She sat 3 desks down. Always had herbal tea in a clear glass. Her typing was slow, rhythmic. She never interrupted. Not even with good intentions. That was rare. Most people try to fix the quiet, She didn't. One evening, she passed by my workstation just as I was closing out a signal interference log. Without a word, she placed a second cup of tea next to mine. Steam curled upward. Lemon balm. I didn't look up. She walked away. I didn't thank her. But the next night, I poured the same kind of tea into the same kind of glass and left it on the edge of her desk. She didn't say anything either, and somehow that was more honest than anything I'd had in years. In my bunk that night, I reopened Maddie's last email. It had sat in a private folder labeled Archive MK unread since she'd sent it. Almost a year to the day. Subject line. Just wondering. The body only said, "I hope you're doing something that matters." That was it. I closed it again. But not before I whispered aloud I was. The desert doesn't lie to you. It doesn't promise renewal or pretend anything's easy, but it gives you space. And sometimes space is all you need to stop breaking things further. I fell into a routine, not for structure, for survival. I woke up at 5:10. Put on the same shoes, black runners with worn soles I hadn't replaced since 2015. Not because I couldn't, because no one asked me to. Ran the same 3-mile loop along the fence, cold shower protein bar, no music simulations at 7:00, data calibration at 10. Lunch alone, notes by hand at night, no one interrupted. No one reminded me of who I used to be. Which made it easier not to ask myself either. I stopped reading headlines. Didn't check investor blogs, didn't look up what Langford was doing. Didn't wonder where Maddie was. I told myself, if something truly needed to reach me it would, but even silence starts to ask questions eventually. Sometimes in the wind, against the metal roof. Sometimes in the ache behind my knees after a run. Sometimes in the way my name sounded when Elise said it during roll call. It didn't sound like her, didn't sound like Maddie. And that felt like breathing again, small but real. The letter came in a thin white envelope. No logo, no subject line on the outside, just my name. In handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it on the back steps, barefoot, dust in my palm, sky full of nothing but sharp blue. It was from NASA Private Gala, Austin Investor Roundtable. 6 alumni invited to present legacy projects, 1 slot. Open. They were offering it to me. It didn't feel like a door opening, more like a hallway I'd once walked through. Now lit again, but colder. I folded the letter in half once, then again, made a clean crease down the center and placed it under a flat river stone beside my bunk wall. Not because I was rejecting it, but because I wasn't ready to say yes. Some things you don't walk toward, you wait to see if they circle back. That night Elise asked, without really asking. She saw the send, like there's in a V. Envelope still waited, still untouched. She didn't ask what it said, she just said softly, "You still haven't changed your shoes." I looked down. And for the first time I laughed. Just once, but it stayed with me longer than I expected. I didn't reply to the letter. Didn't send a yes, didn't send a no. I just kept it there under the stone day after day as if time would answer for me. Sometimes Elise would glance at it but never comment again. Sometimes I'd brush dust off the corner gently like it was glass, like saying, "I remember," without admitting I was tempted. Each night I'd sit on the back steps, journal in lap, pen hovering. But the entry stayed the same. Still here, still building, still avoiding the shape of her name. And I started wondering not if she was watching, but if she ever even looked back. Because maybe the cruelest kind of absence isn't when someone leaves, it's when they never check if you followed. Have you ever disappeared just to see if anyone noticed you? Weren't chasing them anymore? Yeah. Me too. She used to call me her silent partner. Smiled when she said it. As if silence was a skill I should be proud of. As if fading into the background was a feature, not a flaw. That night, I wasn't silent. I was the name on the screen. The one they said last. The one no one expected. Including her. The paramount hadn't changed much. Still smelled faintly of velvet and varnish. Still had that soft amber glow like the whole place was lit by champagne. I walked in wearing the same navy blazer Maddie once said made me look too serious. Back when she liked to untuck my shirts at networking events, said I was trying too hard to be trusted. I wore it anyway. Elise didn't ask why. She just linked her arm through mine and said, "You still don't check mirrors, do you?" I smiled. Half. She didn't need the other half. Inside, the string quartet was tuning up. Noah Langford stood near the center bar smiling that kind of smile men wear when they think they're winning. Maddie wasn't on stage yet. But her name was everywhere. On the program. On the welcome banner. On the lips of every guest who said, "She's really turned it around. She's the visionary behind Phoenix now." Funny thing about erasing someone. You have to be sure they're not coming back, and even then, you better pray they don't walk in with the truth. I wasn't here for applause. Wasn't here for revenge. I was here to remind her I still existed, and I never stopped building. The lights dimmed just enough for people to turn off their networking smiles. A hush swept through the room, the kind curated by money, by crystal glassware, by confidence that no one would ruin the script. Then came her voice. "Good evening, I'm Maddie Kersey." Applause smooth measured just like her. She wore navy not unlike mine, but sleeker, tailored, sharp enough to draw blood if she moved too fast. "Phoenix isn't just a name," she said. "It's what we do when everything around us burns down. We rebuild." Someone near me murmured, "Damn, she's good." She was. At this, polished, poised. Every word timed like a TED Talk that had survived 20 drafts. Noah stood beside the podium, arms folded, smiling like a man who owned her name. But there was something about her eyes. They scanned the crowd once, twice, paused, and for a fraction of a second they landed on me. Nothing in her voice changed, but her hand curled slightly around the mic. I didn't blink. She looked away first. They kept the surprise for last. Standard gala theatrics. The MC stepped back up all toothy and smooth. And now, our final announcement. Phoenix is proud to announce a new strategic partner for 2024 ASA's lead on the Phoenix Biosignal arm, Mr. Callum Dyer. There was a beat, a breath. And then the pause broke. Heads turned. Chairs shifted. Someone clapped too quickly, then stopped. I stood. Elise stayed seated. No smile. Just her hand resting on the chair beside her where I'd been a second before. I walked to the stage. Maddie was frozen mid-clap. The mic was warm. I adjusted it once more for time than necessity. The room quieted fast, not out of respect, but recognition. They were recalibrating. Rewriting the story in real time, trying to remember how I fit into the version they'd been fed. I didn't explain. Didn't mention Maddie or biosensor blueprints or whose initials were etched on the first prototype that never made it past the garage. I spoke of data integrity. Of long feedback loops. Of how sometimes the thing that fails you isn't the tech but the hands that let go too soon. Someone near the back nodded. Someone else started recording. But I only looked at one person. She didn't blink. But she didn't breathe either. When I stepped down, Noah's hand went to her back. Light. Possessive. She flinched barely, but I saw it. Backstage smelled of sweat and catering trays. Dimmer, realer. She found me near the exit hall. Didn't call my name. Just walked up, heels clicking too loud on marble, and whispered like we were still in our apartment, 2 toothbrushes side by side. "You came back for me, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Not really. It was a story she wanted to believe because it would make her the center again. I didn't answer. Not yet. I didn't answer. Not to her, not in words. She stood there like she used to, half a step too close, expecting the silence between us to mean inevitability. But this time I let the silence breathe. And I let it end. I stepped past her, not with anger. Not with pride. Just decision. At the bottom of the stairwell, Elise stood, one hand at her side, the other holding 2 coats, mine and hers. She hadn't moved. Hadn't come looking. Hadn't asked what took so long. But she saw me. The way no one had in years. Not as a founder. Not as a failure. Not as her past. Just me. She didn't say my name, but it was there in the way her eyes met mine. No question, no performance. Just space quiet held open until I stepped into it. I took the coat from her hand, shrugged it on. Behind me, I could still feel Maddie watching. But I didn't turn. Some echoes don't deserve answers. We didn't linger. Elise and I slipped through the side exit where the air smelled less like champagne and more like asphalt cooling after a spring rain. No press. No confetti. Just our footsteps and the slow creak of the service door swinging shut behind us. At the curb, I reached into my jacket pocket looking for my phone. Fingers brushed something sharp. I pulled it out. A business card. Noah Langford. Heavy stock. Embossed. Confidence printed in Helvetica. I had picked it up backstage. He must have dropped it, or maybe offered it once without looking. I'd snapped it in half without thinking while Maddie was speaking. Now I held the two pieces in my palm. One said Noah. The other said nothing. I didn't toss them, didn't burn them. I slid both halves back into my pocket and zipped it shut. Not everything broken has to be destroyed. Some things just don't belong in circulation anymore. She wanted to rewrite our past as if the pen had never slipped. As if you could circle back to where the map first tore and start again clean. We met at the cafe near Barton Springs. The one with warped tabletops and lemon sugar cookies. It used to be our spot. Back when we were still picking honeymoon locations and building pitch decks on napkins. It was raining light soft, the kind of spring rain that makes the air smell like old flowers and maybe forgiveness. She was already there at the corner table, a copy of our first business plan printed bound in a blue folder just like we did. In 2015, she smiled like it was a reflex. But her hands trembled slightly around the coffee cup. I sat down. Didn't order. A barista passed by, young freckled. Looked at both of us, then said, half laughing, anniversary again. Maddie froze. I didn't. Not this time. I said it evenly and nodded for him to keep walking. She looked down. Smoothed the edge of the folder like it mattered. I found this in my old Dropbox, she said. Do you remember how we started? I didn't answer. Because of course I remembered that wasn't the problem. She slid the folder toward me. Inside, the same sketches, the same margins full of my handwriting, her color-coded notes, my circuitry layouts. This, she said, tapping it once, was the last thing I built that felt real. I watched her face shift, not perform, just fracture. Her voice dropped. Noah used me. I thought I was part of something, but once the deal closed, he moved everything under his name. He called me a messy story. Investors didn't want to trace. She didn't look for pity. Didn't pretend to be surprised. I didn't stop trusting you, she added. Even when I left. I thought I could do it cleaner. Without dragging you through it. I still hadn't spoken. She looked up, eyes searching for something. Maybe the old me, maybe someone softer, but that version wasn't here anymore. I reached into my coat, took out the old USB. The one with our early prototype files, our logo, our initials, etched side by side in graphite. I placed it on the table between us, didn't push it toward her, didn't pull it back, just left it there like a quiet reminder I had always stayed. She had always left. Her eyes dropped to the USB. She smiled, small and sad. You kept it. Not a question. More like disbelief wrapped in guilt. She reached across the table slow, like she didn't want to startle the moment. Her fingers brushed mine just barely, and I pulled my hand back quietly, not to shame her, not to punish. Just to draw a line that should have been drawn years ago. She froze. Then folded her hands in her lap, like a child being told. Not now. Callum, she whispered. I never meant to erase you. I nodded once, then said, the only thing I hadn't yet. You didn't erase me, you paused me. And now you want to hit resume like nothing's skipped. She blinked. I let the silence settle, let it say the rest, because truth is absence isn't evil. It's just loud. And hers had screamed for years. The barista returned with refills. Maddie reached for her cup, but her fingers slipped. The ceramic hit the table edge, then the floor, a clean, sharp sound not unlike a break you see coming but still flinch when it lands. Silence followed as if the room agreed. This was a fainir, axlas I metaphor. She dropped to her knees, quick, instinctive, scrambling to collect the pieces, even the smallest shards. "I've got it," she mumbled. More to herself than anyone. The handle had snapped off clean in one crescent-shaped curve. She picked it up, tried to fit it back, rotated it slowly, but it wouldn't sit right anymore. Her thumb trembled against the glaze. I didn't move. Didn't help, just watched. Not coldly, just honestly. Some things don't go back. Not the way they were, and not the way you wish they could. She was still crouched on the floor, cradling the broken handle like it might change its mind. I stood. Slowly pushed the chair in with the flat of my palm soft enough not to startle her, firm enough not to stall. The USB was still on the table. I didn't take it. I left it there beside the blue folder beside the version of us she wanted to resurrect. The barista looked over, confused, then sympathetic. I nodded once, half smile. No words. The kind of look you give someone when you want them to know it's okay to watch something end. At the door, I turned my collar up, stepped into the drizzle. No sound behind me, no footsteps catching up. Only the click of porcelain as she tried again to piece the cup back together. And the quiet that finally stopped asking me to explain myself. If silence was closure, would you still beg for a quote at the end? The garage still smelled like motor oil and peppermint gum like Dad never fully. I left. Even if the house had been sold 2 summers ago, I'd ask the new owners if I could stop by just once to pick up something from the back. They said yes, probably thought it was a toolbox or an old wrench with sentimental value I found. The box, exactly where I remembered it. Back wall behind a rack of winter coats, no one wore anymore. Brown cardboard edges frayed, marker ink faded but still legible. Maddie's contracts. 2015 underlined twice, like someone wanted to make sure it wasn't lost just unneeded. I sat on the floor. Concrete was cold through my jeans, but my legs didn't argue. There was no music, no flashback montage, no reason this moment should have mattered except it did. Because for almost a decade, I hadn't opened it. Not once. Not when she left, not when I moved labs, not even when I packed everything else. This box was the only thing I'd carried but refused to claim, until now. I pulled the flaps open slowly, like waking something that had gone still for too long. Dust lifted light as breath settled on my sleeves. Inside were stacks of paper contracts, NDAs, early drafts of proposals we'd written in her apartment when we thought 3 a.m. was holy and ramen counted as celebration. I sifted past them one by one until I found the envelope unmarked, tucked between 2 manila folders. Not sealed but still closed. Inside, a handwritten note in her old ink, the kind that smudged if she wrote too fast. For when we get funded, it was dated February 2015. I hadn't seen it before. The letter wasn't long. No metaphors, no polish, just her. Asterisk, asterisk. Callum. If we ever make it, really make it, I hope we remember why we started. Not the press. Not the funding. Not the patents. But the mornings. The busted soldering irons. The way you made coffee before saying a word. If I ever forget that, remind me. Even if I don't deserve it. Even if I act like I don't care. Remind me anyway. Maddie asterisk asterisk. I folded the paper creased along the middle then, again. But I didn't cry. Not because it didn't matter, but because it did. And sometimes that's the reason you stay quiet. I didn't put the letter in my pocket. Didn't fold it tighter or tuck it into my journal or slide it between the pages of some book that meant more than she ever knew. I placed it back inside the envelope, pressed the flap down just enough to hold. Then I slid it under the rest of the papers beneath the contracts, the NDAs, The things that had expiration dates and clauses and signatures that outlasted trust. The box didn't look any different when I closed it. But I did. I taped it shut, found a black marker in Dad's old tool drawer, and wrote one new line: archived, open 2024. Then I carried it to the corner shelf behind the ladder beside the old winter salt. Out of reach but not hidden, not anymore. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the driveway still held puddles. I walked past them without stepping in, without looking down. Some ghosts don't haunt, they just sit quietly until you're ready to acknowledge they've been waiting. I was done waiting. Elise was already home when I got back. Kitchen light on barefoot, her reading glasses low on her nose. She was slicing pears into a bowl slow and even. She always cooked like she was listening to something deeper. She looked up when I walked in, not startled, not relieved. Just present. Garage okay, she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. No push. Just a landing spot offered without edge. I nodded, shrugged off my jacket, set my keys down in the small ceramic tray she made for pocket noise. I still called it that. She still let me. Did you open it? Her voice was soft, not cautious. Like asking the weather, not the wound. I sat across from her at the kitchen island. Let the silence stretch, not to avoid her, but to make room for the part of me I'd finally reclaimed. Yeah, I said. Just that. She nodded. Didn't ask what was inside, didn't ask how it felt. She sliced the last piece of pear and nudged the bowl toward me. We ate in quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that needs to be broken. It was the kind that holds things. Later, while washing the dishes, I reached for the soap. Her hand was already there. Fingers brushed, no tension, no backtracking. She let her palm rest over mine for a second, and that was enough. Not every connection needs a declaration. Some simply need to be noticed. I never told her about the letter. Not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't belong in the life we were building. She didn't need to know. Maddie once wrote, "Remind me why we started." Because Elise already knew why we began. We didn't build our foundation out of unfinished sentences or photos too heavy to keep on the wall. We built it out of daily things. Morning tea. Shared playlists. Sidewalk walks when the Texas sun dipped low enough to forgive. We never said the word healing. But it happened anyway. Not in grand declarations, not in breakthroughs, but in the way she never asked me to be anything other than present, and I was. Finally, that night after the lights were off and the house hummed low, I passed by the little shelf where she kept the mail and her keys. I slipped something between two books. Not the USB, not the letter. Just a sticky note with a date on it, the 3rd of February 2024. She'd know what it meant. That was the day I opened the box. And closed something else. The new office wasn't large. Just a corner room at the ASA complex, 3rd floor west wing, where the afternoon sun slipped in like a soft witness. I hadn't been back in weeks, not since the gala, not since Maddie's voice shook behind that velvet curtain, not since the letter. This was my first day stepping in as director. Official, quietly permanent. No press release. No ribbon cutting. Just my name etched in brushed steel on the glass. Callum Dyer, PhD. Phoenix Signal Project. Research lead. I stood at the door for longer than I meant to. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I finally wasn't. For years I had imagined this moment would feel like a finish line. But standing there, hand on the doorknob, I realized it was just a room. A room I had built toward. And now a room I could walk into without asking for permission. Inside, the desk was already set up. New monitor. Clean whiteboard. Empty bookshelves waiting to be filled with something that wasn't resentment. I placed the USB in the drawer. Not to hide it. Just to stop carrying it in my coat like a wound. I opened my laptop. Let the screen warm up. Background hum of the air vent above me, steady grounding. There was a knock. Elise stood in the doorway. 2 paper cups in hand. No words, just a smile, the kind you only give someone when you know they've made it through a storm and didn't broadcast the forecast. She stepped in, set one cup down, then looked at the whiteboard. Blank. For now, I said. She sat on the edge of the couch, legs crossed. No rush in her posture. No expectation. You gonna fill it with equations or ghosts? I smiled. Depends on the day. We drank coffee, no ceremony, no toast to new beginnings. Just two people in a room that didn't require reinvention, only arrival. She didn't ask about Maddie. I didn't bring it up. Some stories end off page. That's how they stay finished. Later, after Elise left for her department meeting, I walked over to the window. Below the courtyard buzzed graduate students with clipboards, a maintenance guy dragging a hose, a hawk circling high overhead. I used to think closure came with ceremony, a conversation, a final apology, maybe a hand reaching back that you could finally decline. But it doesn't. It comes in moments like this, where you realize you're not angry anymore. You don't wish it had been different. You just don't need to hold it in your hands every morning. I reached into my bag, pulled out the manual coffee grinder Dad gave me years ago. Still scratched. Still loud when you turn the crank. I placed it on the shelf beside my books. Let it sit there like a small monument, not to loss, but to what stays with you without needing to haunt. Before leaving for the day, I wrote one thing on the whiteboard: signal to noise. A reminder that not every loud thing is meaningful, and not everything quiet is weak. As I turned off the lights, the sun caught my name on the glass again. It shimmered just enough to feel like mine. Some boxes take years to open. And when you finally do, you don't always find anger. Sometimes you just find yourself no longer waiting. We can't rewrite the past, but we can choose how gently we close it. Sometimes walking away isn't bitterness. It's the bravest kind of love you give to yourself. Because not every goodbye needs an answer. Some just need peace. If this story touched something quiet inside you, share a moment you had to let go. I'm here reading with you. And maybe someone else needs your story too.